Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to the show. I want to first off start off by wishing you a happy Halloween. I wanted to hop on here and record a special episode for Halloween. So this episode wasn't announced. It's something I decided to do impromptu, especially for Halloween. And I wanted to hop on here and talk about ghosting. I think we've all had our experiences with ghosting. I've certainly had mine, and I want to share a little bit about an experience that I've had. It's been some time ago, but it was a do you ever have an experience in a relationship that's profound, and it really just sort of changes how you view things or how you systematically approach relationships here on out, or even just how you think about things, or it just sort of raises your level of awareness and causes you to reflect internally somehow, right? And so my last experience with ghosting was very similar with that, where it just sort of it changed just how I think about myself and other people. And it's been a while ago, but I'll share that with you. And then let me first, before I dive into sharing what my experience was, I want to, for folks who are listening and they're not sure what ghosting is abruptly cutting off communication with someone whom you are dating or in some sort of a relationship with, without any sort of communication about it. And that you've decided that, hey, I'm not going to see this person anymore, or I don't want to be bothered with them, so I'm going to cut off communication. I'm not going to explain anything. I'm not going to reach out and communicate what my actions are. I'm just going to sever that. And not only am I going to cut communication, but I'm going to cut off any possibility of contact with that person unless, again, it's on my terms. Okay, so now that I've given you a little bit of background on that, and I also want to mention, I've done a previous podcast episode. I think it's been like 2 years, or give or take some time now. It's been a while back on ghosting. So this is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to hopefully be a little bit shorter. Because I hear that you guys want some short episodes sprinkled in there. So I'm definitely going to try to cater to the folks who want shorter episodes. But in my experience, I was seeing someone long distance. We had, even though it was long distance, we made efforts to be in contact, visits and things like that. And then one day it's just like, poof, that person was gone and nothing. And of course, that is very devastating, right? It's like, oh gosh, you start to ask yourself all of these questions. And if you have a core wound of abandonment or rejection like I do, it like sends you into a tailspin of like, oh gosh, just sort of questioning yourself and questioning the evolution of the relationship and trying to go back and pick things apart. If you are very secure and you don't have these issues, then this is probably not for you, because secure people who don't have these wounds don't tend to do these questions, right? They don't tend to go through this agonizing process. They're able to quickly adjust and say, Oh, it's about that person. That person has the issues, and it's not about me. And I'm just gonna, pick it up and move on. Yes, it was hurtful or whatever, but oh well, I'm just gonna move on. And it's very quick, for people who are well adjusted to move on, or very securely attached to move on and sort of just cut their losses and pick up. But for those of us who have been in, relationships or families or what have you, where there's been rejection or there's been some relationship trauma, it can be much more difficult, and it can also be it can be re-traumatizing. And so, just to speak to that, that it could definitely just sort of remind you of other elements or other time periods where you rejected or you felt like you weren't loved enough, you weren't good enough, and or a person wasn't there to meet your needs and you're not sure why, like they never showed up for you. So this could be something if you've had a parent that's never been there, or will never come and see you, or like, just doesn't make the effort. All of these things can sort of kick up that dust, if you will. And so I want to really quick go through some reasons why someone could ghost you. And this list of things isn't meant to be comprehensive, but just some quick and dirty reasons or common reasons that I've encountered. And hopefully this can help you in some way, just sort of define things. You know, so let's go through it. Of course, and I have my handy dandy list. But of course, so the first reason here is that a person doesn't have the words to explain um, their actions or what they want to do. So maybe they're feeling overwhelmed. Maybe they are feeling like this relationship isn't working for me, or this I'm not as interested in this person as they are in me, or whatever it is, and they just don't have the words to explain that, right? Or they're choosing not to, they're choosing to not communicate, right? And so they're choosing not to communicate their feelings, their actions, and or they're choosing to avoid the consequences of their actions, right? Because it's so easy. People may think it to be so easy to be impulsive and just sort of act out, and be selfish and sort of act out. But it's much harder to deal with that when you have to face someone and sort of explain that, right? And people don't like feeling uncomfortable. They don't like looking into a person's eyes or into a person's face. In explaining that and dealing with the repercussion of how they may hurt another human being, right? And so there's that avoidance pattern there, right? Um, Number two or three, I guess, two, one and two were kind of combined, but three, you may feel like you don't owe the person an explanation. And that's a little bit different from the first one where you don't have the words to explain, but this is more like entitlement. Like, I really don't owe you anything. And for that, when you feel like you don't owe a person an explanation that you've been seeing, there is a dehumanization aspect to it. It's almost like, you know what, we weren't, maybe you sort of justify it in your mind that like maybe we weren't together long enough, or we didn't have, it wasn't serious, or, whatever, or I didn't promise you anything. And so there's a dehumanizing aspect to that where you're just kind of like, you think of this person as almost like they're not really a human being that's worth any sort of explanation. Um, Number four is that your intentions were dishonest, meaning that you entered into this dating or this relationship with intentions that were not honest. You intentionally led a person on. You said, "Hey, I'm interested in you. I want to pursue this, or I'm interested in dating and seeing where this goes, where you honestly may have never had any intention of dating. You might have only had the intention of just having sex with that person, or only seeing that person until your real girlfriend came back to town, or maybe you started dating someone and you're actually married. And so you weren't be honest about being married to someone else. So when you're still married, even if you may be separated from someone, may be separated from the person that you're married to, you honestly have no intention of really actually starting a new relationship with someone else, because you never intended to leave your spouse. So that may be another reason. Um, Number five is that you are a person with avoidance, avoidant attachment. I've had a few episodes now on attachment just so that you guys could get an understanding of that. The most recent episode that you guys may find helpful is the one that I had with Sheena Lachey, my buddy over there from Black Girls Heal, and she broke that down. But if a person has an avoidant pattern, that means that they're unable to securely attach. And so whenever they're starting to feel feelings for someone, or they feel like the relationship is getting too close, that scares them and they're out of there, right? And six, they've got options, they're seeing other people. Seven, they want to, leave the foot in the door. They want to explore things and put their foot in the door and have the chance to come back, come in and out of your life whenever they feel like it. So that could be, sort of factoring in avoidance. That could also be factoring in seeing other people. That could also be factoring in someone who is immersed in their job or something else, and the relationship is like very low, or dating for them is like very low on the totem pole. And so they kind of just come and go when they feel like it. Um, and eight, one of the things that I want to mention is that they may feel like you are too good for them. And so if they feel like, oh goodness, they may jump into something, start dating you, and get in there and start seeing what you're about. And if they're feeling very insecure, or they may be underestimated how far the relationship would go, they may feel like, wow, this is too good to be true. And I can't really actually measure up to the potential of this relationship, or I can't measure up to this person due to whatever insecurities I have, or just maybe even misrepresentations of yourself that you may have put out there. And so even you may ghost because you feel like that person's too good, or the relationship's too good, or you don't know how to handle it, or you misrepresented who you were, meaning that you may have lied about some things about your character. And then, when you start to feel guilty, you want to cut that person off. One of the things that I want to mention about what I think ghosting is too, and I sort of definitively broke it down. But one of the things that I want to say about it that I don't think gets talked about enough, and it may sort of upset some people who are listening to the podcast, or like make you feel like, well, ghosting is emotional abuse. Make no bones about it. It's emotionally abusive to the person on the receiving end. We live in a world where we're full of technology. Life is easy. Life is convenient. Um, there's not a reason out there that I don't think you should not be able to communicate. Yes, I understand that people have different challenges, and I get that, and I sympathize with that. And maybe I'm a little bit biased. I don't know. I'm certainly willing to admit that, but I do think, in my opinion, professionally and personally, ghosting someone is emotionally abusive. When you are cutting off something, you're not honoring the other person. You're not respecting or valuing the other person enough to give them an explanation. And it's different when you're in the trenches of something. You're in a relationship where you've been dating for a while. Things have been exchanged, versus someone you may have gone on one date with and it didn't work out is still emotionally abusive, or and it lacks integrity, because I think at the end of the day there's definitely simple ways of telling someone that you're not interested, or you no longer want are wanting to pursue a relationship. So let me run down, some things that ghosting can cause a person, right? Ghosting can definitely cause you to be confusion. It's like totally mind-boggling, right? How you can be seeing someone or being in a relationship with someone, whether it's a romantic relationship, friendship, or what have you, and then they could just disappear, and then they could cut off the communication, and it's almost like you don't exist, right? And that's confusing. It's like, wait, hold up, what did I do? What happened here, right? And number two, if you, again, I'll speak to if you're having those, if you have any wounds around abandonment, rejection, or just people leaving, or, just any of that kind of stuff, any wounds that I may be just sort of escaping my mind because it's late when I'm recording this. You definitely self-analyze. You may pick yourself apart. You may pick the relationship apart, and try to go through. You may call in to your friends, your therapist, or whoever is in your support system, and sort of just talk about it. It's devastating, right? It's painful. Like, you want to understand what happened, and you may even question the reality of the relationship. Like, am I crazy? Like, did this really happen, or like, and this could, the stuff that I'm talking about that you may go through, you may actually go through phases of it, right? So it might not be all at the beginning, or all at the middle, or all at the end. It could be a phase, it could be cyclical. It could be any number of ways in which you might experience some, one, or none of these, right? But you could have symptoms of depression, anxiety. Of course, you would grieve the loss of, like, what was, or what could have been, or what should have been, right? And you might feel ashamed, and it's like, you might feel ashamed of, like, oh, I might have told people about this. This person people may have been asking you about it, or maybe there's some other layers of shame, like, oh my God, that if you've been ghosted more than once, there can be some shame or embarrassment, like, man, this seems to be a trend, like, what is happening, right? And it's like, oh, I thought I was doing everything right. I don't really understand how this happened, so just feeling ashamed. There are other levels to ghosting. I've talked about sort of micro ghosting, like, a person may disappear or maybe try it out before they go full-fledged ghosting. And what this looks like is a person might disappear for a day or two, and then come back. A person might disappear for a few hours, and then come back, but they may just sort of be trying it out and then come back after feeling guilty or what have you. But there's also, one of the things that I want to talk about is, like, caspering. And caspering is kind of like, it's a simple way of ending contact, right? And caspering is like when the ghost is like, they show up, and maybe they show up after, 6, 7 months or some crazy amount of time, and they sort of give like a simplistic exit. So it might be more of like a vague text message, or they may reach out on social media and send a vague message there. And the message is more of a thanks, but no thanks type of thing. Like, thanks for the great time we had, but it's done. And it's very simple. Again, it doesn't really offer you the explanation. That person doesn't offer you the chance to reconnect. There's also a tactic called orbiting. Orbiting is when, again, that person again has ghosted you, and they may do something where they're sort of reaching out in vague ways, like they're it's obvious that they may still be watching you or keeping up with you a little bit. So that may look like a person sort of watching your stories on social media. It could look like they're liking your posts. Again, they're not really engaging in contact, but they're still sort of circling around, if that makes sense. So they're doing things to let you know that they're there, but they still are choosing not to engage in a conversation. And breadcrumbing is also another form of that person telling you no. They're just basically they're leading you on. Breadcrumbing is like, when you're again, you're still misleading someone. So you may be sending, like, again, sort of vague text, slow text to make someone think that you are still interested. Again, you have no intention of pursuing this, and you may be sort of stringing this person along by sending vague texts, false promises of we'll get together soon and blah, 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 when you honestly have no intention of connecting with that person. Lastly, what I want to touch on is what to do when the ghoster returns. Almost always, a ghoster will surely turn back up in some way, shape, pattern, or form. And it's always good to have an important strategy to to implement when that person shows back up and comes back around. And I won't say this is 100% of the time, but the majority of the time, a person who ghosted you will typically show back up. And so I think if that happens to you and that person who ghosted you and caused you a tremendous amount of pain shows back up in your life, I think first thing you want to do is have a plan for that way before it actually happens. So you want to, part of your planning would be like having your therapy, getting your support, doing your work to work through whatever wound that this has brought back up for you. So making sure that you're taking care of yourself in that way and doing the work. This is hurtful, it's painful, honor that, but do that work with someone else and get your strength back. So just sort of validate how you feel and work through the stuff that comes back up. And it requires you sort of that's tough work. It can be tough because for a lot of us, again, that could be a deep, deep core wound. So do the work through all of the wounds, journal, take care of yourself in that way, read the self-help books of whatever you're noticing, feel your feelings that are coming back up. But okay, outside of that, if that person should return, whether or not you want to engage in them is your personal choice. So be very clear about that. I mean, you may have told other people and they have their opinion, and that's all fine, well and good. But whether or not you decide to re-engage with them is your personal choice, and you need to think about what your values are when it comes to relationships and make a personal decision based on that. And that should come after you've done the personal work that I've talked about. So, hopefully by the time that person circles back, you've already done a fair amount of work and you're acting on logic. You're acting on something that you've carefully thought through, and you're not acting on the emotion of like, oh, hey, I miss you, or you kicked up that wound and now I feel validated because you circled back when I thought that maybe you wouldn't. All right. Number two, before you even re-engage in the situation, have a conversation, be very clear about what your boundaries are. And your boundaries are meant to protect you. It should not be easy for someone to kind of come and go out of your life like a revolving door. So you need to be very clear about what those things are and be ready to implement that. And every boundary that you sort of verbalize, which you don't have to verbalize every boundary with this person, but if you do, be prepared to implement them. So you know, in terms of implementing boundaries, there's got to be consequences for actions. So again, if you're choosing to re-engage with this person, you know, and you could be very clear, like, if this happens again, we're done, or I'm not choosing to engage, or I need to have, I need to um, I need to see these things from you, or have this sort of security from you before I'm willing to re-engage with you again. And these conditions have to be met in order for me to re-engage again. And so be very clear in your communication. So, three, being very clear and making sure that that person is clear in their communication going forward, and that they're honest about what happened. And I think that you need to talk about what happened before you can move forward with any sort of future with this person. So you need to have a clear understanding of why this person felt like they couldn't come to you, or why they felt like they couldn't communicate with you. And also, what are they going to do in order to make sure that this isn't an issue going forward? And number five, four or five, you want to weigh the relationship. Is this relationship really that important to me at this point after I've done the work? Is it worth the risk for me to re-engage? You know, was this relationship in my life for a season and it taught me a lesson, or is this a person that I really want to have in my life long term? And if this relationship is seasonal, be done with it, cut your losses and move on. You know, and if this person is more to you, or you feel like it can be more to you, then that's something that you want to weigh out as well. And it helps too, as you're weighing out the relationship, to perhaps write it down or talk with someone who is very objective. Um, and again, I go back lastly to making sure that person is willing to do the emotional labor going forward. If that person is entering back into a relationship with you, or they want to reconnect with you, what work have they done? You know, and what work are they doing whenever, you know, they have that urge to flee? And it's not enough for a person to say, well, I just learned and I know that I did the wrong thing. Nope. No, 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 no. I need to see the work that you're doing. And I need to understand what's happening there. But I hope that this has been helpful. I tried to condense and put it in as clear, as concise of a podcast for you as possible. And this is a special episode for Halloween. So happy Halloween to those of my listeners out there who celebrated. For those of you who don't, I hope that you have a great week. And there will be a second podcast out this week, just because this one is a short episode that I thought was, you know, I wanted to create for Halloween. And until next time, guys, thanks for listening and being with me, and take care of yourselves and be well. Bye for now.